So for the first 10 minutes of this, as a video, unfortunately, we had an issue with one of the cameras. So therefore, for the first 10 minutes or so, if you're on YouTube, this is just going to run with a bounce over it. And then after about 10 minutes, in we come. In all of our glory, magnificent stuff. I'm sure you will agree. I don't wear this shirt for anyone. I wear it especially for you. So you'll be able to see all of that and us hunched over microphones after Liverpool left the side down against Nottingham Forest. So apologies for that. Apologies for the inconvenience. But we wanted to get the show out as quickly as possible, what with the Ajax game being on the horizon. We didn't want to have to do it again. So from a video point of view, as you're getting this, it will just have our bounce graphic on for a period of time, and then after about 10 minutes or so we'll be coming in. So see you then. It is the Anfield Wrap after Nottingham Forest 1, Liverpool 0. And before whatever happens in Amsterdam, I am joined by Andy Bell. I found Amsterdam difficult to say there. I'm Neil Atkinson, Philippa Smallwood and Stu Wright. We are obviously going to be talking about the forthcoming game in Amsterdam, because at least offers the potential of something brighter than talking about what happened on Saturday lunchtime. Nottingham Forest 1, Liverpool 0. Andy, you were there. It was poor from Liverpool. The one thing, there's lots of mitigating circumstances, but I'm sick of mitigating circumstances in a number of ways. The one thing that was apparent, I felt, from half-time, let's say, is it just looked like a one-goal game from a way out, or certainly like the first goal was going to define absolutely everything. And that's why it's so frustrating, the nature of the goal that Liverpool concede in terms of its phases, in terms of what happens in the build-up to it. It's funny and it's difficult because the solidity of the two home games completely disappeared against a side that does not have the attacking talent, never mind of Manchester City, but of West Ham. And Liverpool yet found a way to concede a really soft one.
Yeah, it was really, really poor. Loads of really poor individual performances, and so disappointing that we've kind of been catfished by these last two games, thinking our season's turned around. Having a look at the league table, seeing it's only a 7-point gap. Can we get to the World Cup with that gap intact? Then you never know. And it kind of all just went out the window yesterday, and we saw the Liverpool that we've seen, unfortunately, for the vast majority of this season. There's so many poor individual performances, it's unreal. I think, my issue at the minute is that, you mentioned the mitigating circumstances. Nottingham Forest up in the Premier League for the first time, massive game for them. The atmosphere from their end was not that of a 12:30 kickoff. They were right up for it. It was really, really loud. I don't know how it came across on the television. And they're obviously going to get a little bit extra out of the players, an extra 2-3%. That's going to happen. But it feels like if there's anything like that, if there's any sort of boost for any team right now where they play above their level and they give us a game, it feels like we've no answers to it. And that's not the Liverpool of last season. The Liverpool last season found a way to win in these types of games. They were able to play badly for long periods and still win. And at half time, I still thought we were going to win the game. I thought we were going to dog it out, scrap a 1-0 the way we do last season. We're probably arguably as poor in terms of performance level. But yeah, once it happened, it just looked like we were trying that long ball out to the diagonals, out to the wingers. We were beaten in terms of physicality. We were beaten in terms of how we played. And yeah, there's loads to get stuck into them about, I think.
There is loads to get stuck into them about, Stu. The first thing about this is, in the key moments, they're just poor. They spurned the few chances that they got. It doesn't. No expected goals race chart, for instance, includes Virgil's header back across goal, where he can just nod it in at the near post, because he was obviously trying to feed the ball back to Firmino, but he makes the decision that he makes. Carvalho gets the chance to open the scoring in the 6-yard box. Say what you want about the sublime nature of his touch, but he is then in one-on-one with the keeper from 4 yards out, and it doesn't end up in the back of the net. This is, when we talk about ruthlessness, when we talk about giving teams encouragements, this is a really good example of this is what happens. As you don't take those chances, Nottingham Forest begin to believe, your players begin to shrink back into the shells, and that's what we saw massively.
Yeah, we've seen it. We've seen it happen on repeat, haven't we, over the course of the season? But I don't know what a Liverpool goal looks like now. A typical Liverpool goal, and I know that can be thrown out because if you look.
I don't know what one was going to look like yesterday. I think I didn't have a clue what it was going to be yesterday.
I generally don't know what one looks like this season. I don't, and I'm not trying to go over the top here with it. I think that they're having a little bit of a mental breakdown in the final third of the pitch. They're not playing. Andy mentioned, one of you mentioned before, there's mitigating circumstances. I completely understand that because, you've got 3 players out of the forward line who are injured, and all of those could make a real contribution there. But Liverpool, not just yesterday, over the course of the season, have played with a serious lack of authority in the final third. And you play with a lack of authority and a lack of purpose because you've got a lack of belief in what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. And that seems to me to be happening time and time again. Again, that's understandable because of the change of personnel. But at the end of the day, we're Liverpool. And there's a level of expectation that comes with wearing that shirt. And the players behind them in the midfield, they don't seem to know either what's going on ahead of them. They don't seem to be carrying the authority that they need to be carrying to dominate games and dictate the tempo of games. And maybe, as I say, that comes from not knowing what's going to happen ahead of them. But when you're looking at the players involved, it's pretty inexcusable. I think you've got a serious issue here that we're reluctant to point out because it's fairly early in the season and we don't want to be writing players' obituaries at this time. You know, we're in October. But at the end of the day, we're in October and I can't look at the league table. I'm avoiding at all cost the league table. I've watched Match of the Day once this season. It's ridiculous. I'm angry about it. This is absolutely messing up my life. But I think we've got a serious issue there when you the midfield's been spoken about till the cows come home this season. But you've got to look at that and go, look at those players who were picked yesterday.
Well, I'll come to Philippa, I'll come back around to you on it, because this is, for me, Philippa, the changes are, and the enthusiasm that sort of bleeds or disappears in the performance. There's obviously enforced and there's not enforced changes. Now, my concern is that if the manager was sitting here, he'd say, actually, some of the ones that you think aren't enforced are, because I've got a sports science person saying this, I've got this bit of data. But for me, we're being incredibly risk-averse around injuries, which I'd have a lot more sympathy for if we weren't getting many injuries. And that's like for instance, yesterday, I'm at the point where if Thiago, and none of this, I actually think Milner plays relatively well in comparison to others. But if Thiago can't make it, can we have our playmaking right back on the pitch then, please? If you see what I mean. And Thiago gets pulled out at 5 a.m, you feel like, well, that was the decision then becomes, well, we've worked on this because we've decided Trent's having this one off because he's going to start in Amsterdam, and that's the way this is working at the minute, and that's the way we're going to do it. But it sort of, to me, gave the mentality becomes, because you're just going to get a result at Forest. You're not going to need to earn a result at Forest, you're going to get one. And that's what sort of frustrates me in general, was that game always looked as though, listen, I expected Liverpool to win it, but they were going to have to really graft in periods, and they were going to have to be good in periods. And I just find the changes at the minute, both enforced and unenforced, in different ways, obviously, so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that team yesterday, I just kind of, my heart sank a little bit, because I just thought we were asking the likes of Elliot, Carvalho, Curtis Jones, who came in for his first start of the season, to basically go out there and win the game for us, really. Because apart from Salah, there was nobody else who you could see who would really create anything for us. Firmino's been finishing them off this season, but he hasn't really created anything. It hasn't been his normal kind of play that we've seen from him this season. I can only think that Curtis Jones literally came in for Thiago at the last minute because of what happened there. And I think it's part of this where they had a plan going into the game and they didn't want to change too much. So I agree with you that if Thiago's not playing, you need to have Trent on the pitch, because otherwise who's coming from deep and who's going to be able to create anything for you? And you need that in the side. But I think part of it as well is them looking at it and going, we don't want to make too many changes away from the plan that we already had going into the game, which is fair enough. And like you say, maybe the mitigating factors of how many injuries that we've had. Trent's just come back from one, maybe not trying to overload him. But at the end of the day, we need to kind of keep the momentum going, and we've just lost all of that by doing what we did yesterday.
On the momentum point, Stu, this is where, for instance, I've said you could play Trent. The other player you could play Henderson. Henderson could just do an hour. He could do the first hour, and then Jones could come on, set a certain tone, do what he does around tempo. Because for me, what was lacking in that first half from a Liverpool point of view was tempo, and it wasn't clear to me as to who was going to set tempo from a Liverpool point of view. I understand he obviously wanted to go for Fabinho and Thiago, and then the answer as to who's setting the tempo is the easiest one in the world. It'll be one of the best playmakers in the world. He'll sort that out for you. But you haven't got him, and you'd end up, and again, he got 30 minutes in the midweek there, Jones. And you put him in, and I think you put him in because you're trying to protect Henderson. You're protecting Henderson because you're worried about the load. You've got the game at Amsterdam coming up. But you've sacrificed that, the momentum that Philippa's talking about, the tempo that I'm talking about, at the altar, therefore, of we've got these ongoing fitness concerns. And I'll say the other part about this is they're just all getting injuries anyway. You're doing all of this, and they're all ruling themselves out anyway. So what do you want? Do you know what I mean? And that's why. And as I say, I'm sure if the manager was here, he'd be almost laughing at how naive I sound and all that sort of stuff. But I just get to be a football supporter, and I want to see Liverpool win games, and I want to see the momentum that we've got continue. And then you see the team, and you just think, you're almost tricking yourself out of your own options here, Gaffer. Please stop doing that.
You're not being naive. You're not being naive. And if anyone's being naive, it was whoever looked at the fixtures, because we all knew what the fixtures were prior to this World Cup. We all knew what the load was going to be like. It's whoever looked at those fixtures and thought, yeah, that squad sounds, that midfield sound, because it's made, you're talking about protecting players, taking decisions because they can't manage the load. Well, that's because your best midfielders are... might be slightly too far to say over the hill, but certainly past the prime. And you see, you're having to worry about the minutes that they're taking. Any players, which has hardly any, by the way, hardly any at all, that are deemed as in their peak years, so you'd probably say Keita is a crock. And then what you've got below that is kids. And it's, so you find yourself in a situation that was inevitably going to happen.
But how many players does he need, Stu? Because this is what drives me mad.
It's not about the number of players. Well, it is about the number of players, but the number of players that we've got, we could have the same number of players, but more of them being in the actual prime. You've got a massive gap between the players who are now in their 30s, the players that you absolutely need, who are in between 25 and 28, and the kids who are below that. And I think we've got to look at that and reflect on it and think. I mean, even Fabinho, you'd probably say that he maybe should be coming into the back end, but certainly the back end of his prime, and his legs have fell off. And that's almost like the straw that's broke the camel's back, really, because now there's nothing in that midfield when you take Thiago and Henderson out of there, and they can't manage the minutes anyway. So you've got a real problem. Some difficult decisions have to be made, I think, and they probably should have been made already, but you can't be going into a season with this kind of load, with that kind of makeup in midfield, because we absolutely knew that there were certain players who weren't going to get on the pitch regularly. We absolutely knew there were certain players, the better ones, who are plus 30, can't manage the minutes. So you absolutely knew that there were going to be kids who were being relied on. And when you think about Curtis Jones, okay, he's a year younger than Mason Mount, but how many minutes has he had in his Liverpool career? He hasn't got the experience. And to have a situation where Liverpool are going away from home to anyone, never mind a Premier League team, I don't care if they're bottom of the league, to anyone with Carvalho, Elliott and Jones on the pitch at the same time in a starting team, that's just not acceptable.
But this is where the change of systems a conversation, because Stu's mentioning midfielders, but let's be clear about this. If there weren't 3 injuries to attackers, only one of Elliott and Carvalho starts, maybe neither of them starts, because this is where we're now in this cross space where in the past it was 3 midfielders, we knew who the 3 midfielders were. Now there's every chance, for instance, if everyone's available in that team yesterday, Jota starts, Diaz starts, Nunez starts, Firmino maybe doesn't, and that Salah does, and then therefore you haven't got Jones, you haven't got Carvalho, or maybe and you haven't got Elliott, or maybe you do something else. And that to me, Andy, is again, how many players does he need? Because he's got 5 forwards, but 3 of them are out injured. And you're like, but within that, and the context of this is that you can have, and this is why you go through the list, but also we're advertising for a club doctor. At the moment, we haven't got a club doctor. So you go through all of this, and I'm like, you can have the conversation around, could the recruitment be a little bit different? But for me, I'm looking, and this is where it is such a complex conversation, is because why are none of these lads fit? And why are we persevering with the decision-making process that's undermining the team in the context of the fact that none of these lads are fit at the same time, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a major issue in terms of the succession planning and the fact that we've let these lads grow old together. The medical department, I know they don't have a club doctor at the moment, but they talk about the red zone all the time, and they can sort of predict when players are going to need a rest, when their legs are going to fall off.
How's that going for them?
Well, how on earth is this not shown up this season? That after last season, where we all knew, they went 100% every single week, and that takes a massive physical and mental toll. If you take up running and you try and run 3 times a week, you can't give 100% in every run. You can't push yourself to your physical max in every run. Your brain at some point is going to say, hang on a second, that was really painful, and in some sort of a defensive mechanism, it's not going to allow you to do that. And there are times last season where we have to sort of take a half off and just get through certain things. But certainly coming into this season, it was patently obvious that it was going to be very, very hard to go again. People talk about desire and heart. I don't think it's that. I just honest, I do think their legs are knackered. And by the way, I thought Curtis Jones was pretty excellent yesterday comparatively to the rest of the team. You know, I was row 2 in the away end, so I didn't get much of a tactical overview of the game, but for me, the major concern, as I mentioned in my first part, was physicality of especially Carvalho and especially Elliott, and the fact that we like to play those long balls out wide, get them turned, and everyone in their team seemed to be 6'4". Steve Cook, Scott McKenna, Yates is a big lad, Aouane's a big lad.
Aurier's never looked as big.
Exactly, yeah. It was crazy, and I thought Curtis Jones really stood up and was counted physically, looked after the ball relatively well, and you know, a lot of people have said Elliott was our best player yesterday, and I must have missed something being there, to be honest, because I thought he was really, really frustrating. He's always cutting in on the left foot. He's far, far too predictable for my liking. Yes, he's tenacious, and yes, he's sort of looking for these passes and these angles. He probably tried to make things happen more than most, and there's certainly not a mentality issue with him. But I just sort of, you know, compared to Curtis Jones, the two of them were really sort of physically bullied in that game. And you look at the injuries. You mentioned the 3 players. Nunez obviously would have made a massive difference in terms of physicality. Jota's not the biggest lad, but he's never going to shirk a tackle, and you're certainly never concerned about him physically. Diaz,
and good in the air.
And good in the air. Diaz, you know, half the time our goal kicks go to Diaz now because he's so good in the air for a wide player.
Or it hits his chest, he gets it under, he turns, he gets you up the pitch.
Absolutely, yeah, and he'll put himself about. Thiago's the same. And I looked at it yesterday, and those 2 wide players, and I would never have, this is hindsight, because I would never have dreamt of saying this at the start, but when Chamberlain came on, I mean, there's a stat going on about he's 1 touch in 14 minutes. But I actually thought he was much better than the 2 who played in the wings, because he actually offered an option out wide, whereas the other 2 were just cutting inside, and it was getting so what's the word? Congested is exactly the word. Yeah, it was so congested. Whereas Chamberlain actually sort of pulled players out. And listen, the one cross he has is dreadful, but you know, in hindsight, and again, he's sort of a big lad as well. So there's a lot more we could have done, and we could have recognised that a bit earlier for me.
Philippa, the general injury picture, you know, in the context of this game, in the context of the run of fixtures, it is frustrating, and I've got sympathy. You know, you think about Jota is a contact injury whilst playing the game, 98th minute against Manchester City. Diaz, you know, goes the way in which he goes away at Arsenal. Nunez, listen, you know, he's a big lad. He's just got a bit of a tight hamstring. I suspect if it was the Champions League final, he would at the very least been on the bench. But Liverpool have got a decision to make, and again to go back into who they're taking care of and why, and that's complicated. You know, I have got degrees of sympathy. Ear infections dropping from the sky from nowhere, but then it's about what you make of it, and it feels to me a little bit at the minute, whether it includes the managerial / coaching staff, whether it's the players themselves, they just look all a bit battered by events. You know, like I thought there was just not much enthusiasm on the pitch there against Forest, and that's a mad thing to say. Like, how do you define that? What do you actually mean by that? And I'd struggle to explain it, but I'm watching the game and I'm thinking, these lads just don't look like they're having much fun. You know, they don't, and that is one of the things that this Jurgen Klopp Liverpool teams often manage to do in adversity, is look like they enjoy it when it's hard. And at the minute, I don't think Liverpool are enjoying it when it's hard.
Yeah, I go along with that. I think since probably the Champions League final, I think we've just had the wind knocked out of our sails a little bit. And I think the players are struggling. I think it's mentally more than even physically. And I think every time something happens and, you know, they're kind of feeling a little bit sorry for themselves. And that is genuinely how I feel. Like yesterday, you know, that goal goes in. You know, it comes back off the post and goes straight back to one of their players to just literally hit it in the net. Yet when that happens with us, it's going miles away and like going to a defender, or it's going out of play, or, you know, and it's all those little things that happen during these games that, like, you can imagine, like, when you're feeling a bit down on yourself and like things are against you, when those things happen as well, you're going, can we just catch a bit of a break? You know, against City and against West Ham, I actually felt like we had a little bit of luck in those games.
Oh, yeah. And
I felt maybe we've turned a corner here. Mm-hmm. And then you go to Nottingham Forest and basically it feels like we're back at square one again.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because if you'd have said before the City game, you're going to lose the City game 1-0, but you win the next two 1-0, we'd all be going...
Exactly.
Doesn't it all feel like, you know, suddenly you can watch Match of the Day, suddenly you are looking at the league table, and it is this strange thing about football, but for me, though, it's as much the nature of it, because whilst Liverpool do have chances, I'm annoyed with the ones they don't take, because they're pretty straightforward on the one hand. And on the other hand, I'm annoyed that at the end of the game, we're all acting like Dean Henderson's MOM, or he's been absolutely spectacular.
He wasn't.
He's had very little to do in the grand scheme of things. If I felt like we were about to kick the door down, I might feel a bit different about the 1-0. But at no point did I think that door's getting kicked down.
No, there was literally the header from Van Dijk near the end where he had to get down low. That was the only save where I thought he's done a decent save there. Everything else, I was thinking to myself, can we just put him under a bit of pressure? Because I'm not being funny. Like when we played against Man City and he was in goal for Man United, and he was in goal for Man United, he was terrible.
And he made the mistake when we go to Sheffield United that year when Alderweireld squeezes under his body.
Yeah, just put him under a little bit of pressure.
I don't think he's a good goalkeeper.
No, I don't.
Really
and
don't.
his kicking's terrible. Yeah. Like put him under a little bit of pressure, and it seemed to be like almost like we were playing in mud. Do you know what I mean? Everything was sluggish. Everything was like a little bit, one step behind where we needed them to be, and it's just very hard to, like, as supporters, to basically be watching that sort of thing most weeks now and literally be wondering when we're going to see a decent performance out of them. And we got one against City, we know we did. But then West Ham, we slug it out, and you're thinking, that's what we need to do. We need to slug out a couple of results. We did it against West Ham. We do it again yesterday. Then you're thinking, we know how to win games again. But yesterday it was like, we know how to lose games.
I thought it was massively concerning, and I'm not naive to football in the sense that I think every game we're going to play, we're going to be able to find little tight spaces and angles between the lines and score beautiful goals with the ball on the ground. I know that sometimes you have to rely on set pieces, but all of our chances were completely reliant on set pieces yesterday. It's the
exception of the Carvalho one first 10.
Exception of the Carvalho one, which actually I'd completely forgotten about, and I remember it now. But again, that had to be so perfect. That had to be so perfect for that to be a chance. And in a way, especially with my major concern with it, especially with the team trying to break things up the way Forest did, trying to be physical the way Forest did, my major concern is that, that sort of ball that Elliott plays to Carvalho, that has to be absolutely perfect for it to be a chance. And if that's not absolutely perfect, then it's a goal kick to Nottingham Forest, and that's 30 seconds out of the game, and that's the ball being battled for an hour and a half again, and then you have to start from square one, then you have to get the ball on the ground, then you have to build something. It has to be so perfect, otherwise it's exactly what they want. And what Man City did last year was when they didn't have a striker, basically, it meant they were hardly taking any shots, and that meant they were able to build that sustained pressure that you associate with Man City so much. But yeah, it was all set pieces yesterday. I'm sort of contradicting myself because I think it's sort of naive to say we shouldn't be relying on set pieces to beat Nottingham Forest. Sometimes when you go to these teams,
you need one to break the game open.
Yeah, but sometimes you go to these teams, you need two set pieces, you win 2-1, it's absolutely fine, that happens. But the fact that it's not a one-off, we're not creating chances this season in anywhere near the volume what we were doing last season. This isn't a one-off, and it was endemic of what we've seen for the vast majority of this season. So that was concerning for me. We created very little apart from in the air, which is really surprising given the size of their lads. They were dreadful from set pieces, weren't they?
There is, Stu, in amongst all of this, there is the individual performance and individual concerns. There's also the fact that we've changed systems, and my concern with the new system is that it looks great until it doesn't. And suddenly there's big goals absolutely everywhere, and you feel as though we're so easy to play against. And before I get into certain individuals, though I think one of them in particular in the middle of the park, this doesn't suit him, and we're going to have to maybe have a little think about that if we're going to persevere with this, is that this idea that you can play this way, absolutely you can play a football match any way you want, but you've got to therefore be mitigating for what happens if you're just not playing very well, if you're having a bit of a tough day, if it's hard. And that's what worries me about this shape. And that is my overriding concern with it, is that when it gets hard, I don't know, I think Liverpool look easy to play against.
Yeah, that does worry me, because I think the shape does have its flaws, but what worries me more is there's no way, in my mind anyway, that this shape was by design when this recruitment was done in the summer. This is not a case of, this is the way we were going to evolve to. This is a case of, we've got a problem here with the existing shape. The players aren't playing very well. The manager even admitted in a press conference that making a change to the shape was in part an effort to get the players switched on again. Well, if alarm bells aren't ringing there, I don't know when they are going to ring. The players that we've got, they've been brought through on a very, very defined way of playing, and that way of playing allows us to have 3 men in midfield, which allows us to dominate the midfield, or at least go, toe to toe with any 3-man midfield against us. And normally we'd outwork them, we'd outrun them. Now we're exposing players in the middle of the park. We are talking about Fabinho. But Fabinho hasn't just been exposed this season in this shape. Fabinho's been a shadow of his former self for a long time now. We were going to recruit. The idea we were trying to get Tchouaméni in the summer, I think there was no coincidence in why that was. And now we're down to 2 players in the centre of the park, asking them to be more defined in their role, but actually they're older players as well still. So I think there's issues there. What it takes me back to, even if we have a little run at this formation and it seems to be going well, it's not convincing anyone long term. And that takes me back to that feeling of when Rodgers did the box midfield. And, it was getting lauded until we got absolutely spanked back home by Man United, and we were completely undressed with it. Now, I'm not jumping the shark here and saying that Klopp's where Rodgers was at all. Let's hope that Klopp is here with us for a long, long time at the club. But I do think that we're lost. I do think the manager and the coaching staff are heading down rabbit holes at the moment. That's the thing that's concerning me most, is I don't see a convincing way home until serious structural change is done to this side.
I think with it, Philippa, Stu there mentions Fabinho. I want to be really clear about this. He was great against City. And it felt as though, a lot of what he was being asked to do made sense, in the context of that game with that side. I thought he put a really strong performance in. So you can't, you don't want to go too far, but I thought he looked really ropey against West Ham. I think there was a couple of games before then. I think there is things from about last February where I feel as though he's diminished in performance. I think he was blunted by an injury towards the end of the season. And again, for me, he's been an absolute linchpin in what's made this team great. He is younger than his other 2 contemporaries in the middle of the park as well, which is another sort of mild concern here, which is that, I'm just sort of watching him, and it all looks so difficult for him in this shape. It all looks like he's got the square he's responsible for. I always felt was really big. It's about the same size square now, but it's just further up, and it's doing different things. And I thought he was really, really poor yesterday. I thought he gave it away so much.
Yeah, you kind of feel like he's in his own head a little bit. That's how I feel anyway. I don't want to be too harsh on him because I feel like he's being left exposed. I feel like the help that he's being given by his fellow midfielders isn't good enough. He's having to cover an awful lot of ground, and for me, he's having to. I mean, mentioned before about basically, kind of like the tempo of the game. He's having to set both the tempo and do all like the sweeping up, and I think it is very, very difficult for any one player to do that. And I think that's why when he's maybe got Thiago alongside him, Thiago can set the tempo and then he only has to worry about the sweeping up side of things. I genuinely feel like he's carrying something. When I watch him, he can't turn at the moment, and I don't know what that is. I don't know if he is carrying an injury. I don't know if I'm just trying to look for some sort of defence of him because he's been so magnificent for us.
That's on the ball as well as off the ball, isn't it?
Yeah,
He looks
exactly.
really awkward. Just, one thing about Henderson is he can ping it sort of first time, his body shape. Fabinho looks awkward on the ball at the minute. I don't know whether he was so good at other things, but I don't remember him being like that.
No, he's always, for me, he could always pick a pass as well. He's not been a brilliant ball player, but he could always pick a pass, and it just seems like he's overthinking things that, he's just not able to do things naturally at the moment. And I think that of a lot of the players, to be honest,
You know what, Philippa, though? It was 3 years ago when we won the league with him, and it was 4 seasons ago that we won the Champions League. And at that time, you had Jordan Henderson in his prime, and you had Gini Wijnaldum in his absolute pomp.
Yeah.
And they ran that midfield ragged. And that I mean, don't get me wrong, though. Fabinho during that time was amazing. I mean, they were. Listen, I know Watford aren't the pinnacle sorry Watford fans if any of you listening, but I know they're not the pinnacle of the Premier League, but I remember one game in Anfield where I couldn't believe the tracking back that he did, and this tackle that he pulled from nowhere when running towards his own box. You know, he was a glorious player, and as you said, there he could pick a pass. I mean, there was it the pass against Man United when he Mane,
yeah.
Unreal, and they were commonplace. He would look for those things. But you're right in terms of he's definitely exposed because he doesn't have the legs around him now. But there's also a diminishing return psychologically with him because he lacks that authority now. He lacks that. You know, you look at a player like him, that level of experience, those medals that he's got, you know, in the cabinet. He should be absolutely swanning around the City ground yesterday. He should be absolutely stamping his authority over the game, demanding the ball, and he's not. And that's probably because he knows he's not playing well. He probably knows that he hasn't got the protection. And at this level, at elite football, you know, someone told me once who worked at the club that, you know, the difference between the skill level of these players from the top to the bottom of the Premier League is marginal. They're all unbelievable footballers. You know, 90% of it at this level is psychological. It's in the head. And he is one of a number of players, but it's really obvious with him that psychologically he's taken some knocks there, and he's not the force, is he now, that he was?
One thing I've realised as well, like, we think there's a massive gap between like us and City and the rung below, and there is in terms of what goes out in the pitch, but I think the difference between just reverting back to that is so fine.
Yeah.
It can be, you know, they're a little bit more tired. It can be, it's a lot of it's belief and confidence in how they're playing. I think it's such a fine line between that level and just dropping to be sort of your general top 4 team.
And that's what my hope is with Fabinho, because as Neil said, he's not as young as some of the older ones in that midfield. I'm hoping that it is merely a psychological issue rather than a physical one, and you know. That's easier to get back, isn't it? Hopefully in time, with a run of games and a run of form, hopefully you convince yourself and you start to show that authority again. But it does really worry me that it could be physical.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm kind of hoping that because his form is so poor that he doesn't go to the World Cup, and that basically he gets a proper rest, more mentally than physically. I think, like you say, I just feel like there's a number of our players who are a bit burnt out. You know, as a football fan, I feel burnt out. Yeah. So I can only imagine like how they're feeling. And the more of them that can get a bit of a rest while the World Cup's on, the better for us, I think, and just reset and go again after the World Cup.
Go on.
Are you doing Gomez at all, Neil? Like later on?
So no, we'll do it now. I think there's a thing with Gomez where I think he's suddenly having to put games together, and Sean Rodgers actually flagged this either on review or on Tour Live last week and said, I'm expecting a Gomez to throw one in soon. And it was as much, you know, obviously there's the instant that leads to the goal. I want to be clear about this. I'm made up he fouls him, even though it comes from the free kick. I'm made up he fouls him. Yeah. He makes a mess of it, but then he just goes, right, this is where I have to take a yellow, and Jesus, Liverpool haven't been doing that at times this season. And then the ball has to travel so far to end up in the back of our net that, you know, for me, there's other issues at play here, and one of them is actually Fabinho on the cover. For me, Andy, what was concerning when I was watching him yesterday was again, distribution, was the way in which he was with the ball. Every time he had the ball, it looked like he was just about to give it away.
Yeah. And that's a massive issue because we all know what Van Dijk has in his locker. He's got that diagonal ball which he can put on a sixpence from 80 yards away. And it's very obvious when those two play, the disparity in quality on the ball between them. And Joe Gomez, I always thought was decent on the ball, and I think he still probably is, but it's a very pointed tactic for teams now that, you know, and Matip's got in his locker the little mazy run.
I think the Gomez thing, the Gomez ball that you always loved to see him play was the one which he would power into Trent Alexander-Arnold as Trent was on the march. He played that ball brilliantly. Yeah. There's no option for it now because we've changed the system.
But the hammering the ball into midfield, he's really, really poor at that pass. He's really poor at that pass, and it's a quick turnover. It means that they're running at our back four. And, like, don't get me wrong, I thought he was amazing against Man City. I thought he was absolutely superb. I thought he was really good in midweek as well. And all of a sudden, I was sort of thinking, yeah, you know, because I've been very critical of Joe Gomez recently. And I don't think it's any fault of his own. I just sort of look at him and I think the injuries have taken their toll a little bit. I mean, he must have about 20 bolts in either knee by this point, the amount of the sort of surgeries he's had. And that's not his fault in any way, shape or form, but I do look at him. I looked at him against United and I thought he's dropping the line far too quickly because he doesn't trust himself to get back in. I looked at him in certain games, last season where he was tracking back, and I just think he just looks awkward. He doesn't back his strength. He doesn't back his body anymore. And as I say, no fault of his own. I thought he'd maybe turned a little bit of a corner against City and West Ham. And a lot of people have said about Joe Gomez, he just needs that run of games to get himself back up. But for how long have we been saying that? We've been saying that since the first half of the Madrid season, haven't we? Where he was at his peak alongside Van Dijk, arguably better than Van Dijk for a lot of that season. We've been saying that for so long. He needs to get a run of games. But if Matip comes back in, he plays. If Konate comes back in, he plays. So if Matip's back Matip's not a long-term thing, is it? So if he's back next week, well, all of a sudden Joe Gomez is on the bench for another 4 games. So when's he getting this run of games that's supposedly going to magically make him into the player that he once was? I've real concerns about it, and the distribution yesterday was dreadful. There's at one point he allows Al-Wanaid to sort of start running at him when he could have very easily just gone and been front foot to get.
He wasn't looking at the ball at that point. What he does is he panics.
Do you think?
You literally see it on the telly. He panics. It's on the right flank. He's coming over to deal with it. He realises that if the lad takes a good touch, he's not going to get anywhere. He realises he hasn't got much cover. I'm sort of both my point about this is, I like the fact that he panics on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'd like him to stay calmer and so you feel like you want your cake and eat it. I feel at times Liverpool don't panic enough.
Yeah.
So he basically goes, we're in trouble here. We need to fall back into a certain position. But actually, if he just kept his eye on the situation, he's just got in, got across, nicked it, and gone from there. And it's back to this idea of where the confidence is with all of them, because a confident Joe Gomez just knows, I'm just going to deal with this and it's going to go. Whereas what he's actually thinking is, whether he's confident in himself or not, this is the confidence thing. He's probably thinking, the fuck are my teammates? Who've I got here to help me if this goes wrong? I can't go and engage.
But that's a psychological thing, Neil.
Massively.
But it's a psychological thing in terms of how they're playing at the moment. But I think it's a psychological thing with him in general, in terms of how the injuries have taken their toll. I don't mean to go on and on about it, but I think if that same game happens and we've won all 7 games this season, we're top of the league and we're flying, and that game plays out in the way it does, I don't think you get a much different Joe Gomez, because I think in that situation he's not backing himself. He's not going to win that ball because he knows, if I'm going to look an absolute mug here if I get done. It's same with the free kick. He just knows the free kick where he takes a foul, which was a great foul by the way. He knows he's not getting back in, and I'm possibly being harsh, but that's just the way I feel about him at the minute.
I don't think you're being harsh, Andy. I think you make lots of fair points there on him, but I just don't think he's our biggest problem. And I think if you've got 4 centre backs and he's one of them, sound. He's a good player, and I think it's also worth pointing out the caveat, because it was pointed out before about Fabinho against Man City. Joe Gomez against Man City was incredible, by the way, and Haaland was playing on. I know Van Dijk got a lot of plaudits in the media, but Haaland was playing on Gomez all the time, and they were overloading that channel on Gomez and Milner, and they were both impeccable, but Gomez in particular was incredible, and I think that there's something else at play there. That is a game where he's got to be focused and concentrated on the defensive, on the reactive stuff. Yesterday, away from home at Forest, where we're dominating possession, he's getting a lot of the ball, and actually he's got to be proactive. He's got to be one looking for the movements in front of him, which, by the way, I think even when the case in point of the goal, I think the manager would be saying the movement in front of him was poor. And he also, as you said, Neil, before, didn't have the normal outlet that he has to his right with Trent. So I think there's a lot of factors in there which made him question himself for just a moment, and then he's caught.
What I think they do, Stu, is they decide they're happy for him to have it.
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll defend the next pass, and because he'll find the next pass a little bit tougher, because he's not Van Dijk and he's not Matip, etc., etc. And I think there's a lot of, I've got all of his passes here, and I thought he gave it away more. He only gives it away 14 times. I mean, he makes 117 passes. That is an unbelievable number of times to pass the ball in a game. So his pass success rate's actually 88%, which isn't bad. You look at the ones he's given away; they're all forward. I've got them in front of me right now on the screen. They're all forwards pretty much when he's giving it away, when he's losing possession. And there's loads and loads where he's keeping it because he's just going sideways, and I can see all of those ones as well. He plays a couple into that right diagonal. I can see them there as well. But my point is more, I think they went, he gets to keep it. Yeah. He can have it. And I thought they did a bit of that with Fabinho as well. Let him have it. And we defend the next pass.
And the onus then is on the players in front of him then to make better movements to get him out of trouble, to help him, break those lines, and I think that's something we've got to take into consideration there. So for me, Joe Gomez, not his finest hour, but as one of Liverpool's 4 centre-backs, absolutely great with that, because you look at the assets that he's got, unbelievable speed, he's good in the air, you know, he's cool on the ball normally. And I think that, you know, he has been riddled by injuries, as you say, Andy, and maybe that means that he can't start a run of games. He can't be maybe playing 3 in a week, and maybe we've got to pick and choose his games. But, you know, he's not the biggest problem.
Well, I think as well, just dead quick on this, I think Joe Gomez is your fourth choice centre half for any other team in the league. Absolutely fine. You know, top quality fourth choice centre half, but your injury records in Matip and Konate mean it's more of a third and a half choice centre half. You know what I'm trying to say? And I think the difference we have to play in terms of the line when we play Konate compared to when we play.
But I'll go back to what I'll say to you over and over again, Andy. How many fucking players do you want them to have? Genuinely, this is where this, you know, on all of this. So he's got to have, you know, at the minute his fifth choice centre half's Phillips. You know, does he need to therefore, you know, where the squad can only be a certain size, it's 25 according to the rules anyway, but also, you know, he himself's on record in the past to say he prefers a smaller squad working with yada. Well, that's out the window for him at the minute. But how many players do you want him to have? Because the other thing with Gomez is that because the injuries to Matip and Konate, Gomez this season has been second choice at right back. Now you've got a lad who would rather be playing centre midfield, whether we want to see that or not. He's now playing at right back in this instance, but this is also a rotational choice. And do you know what I mean? Like the ramifications of this and the knock-on effects can't become you need 33 players.
But I think in that situation, you know, we might just have to be a little bit ruthless with Gomez, and that may come back to sort of bite me in the ass saying that. I really hope it does, because I love him. I think his mentality to come back from these injuries over and over again. And listen, he put in a really good performance when he came on at right back. Who was it against? Arsenal. He came on at right back against Arsenal, was really, really good, and he can still be an asset in these games. But if it gets to a situation where we're having to change how we're playing when he's playing so many games, then I think that then becomes a little bit of an issue.
Well, this is why I think this is, you know, the complexities around this are quite major. Because I think, for instance, he himself, I think he can be first choice alongside Van Dijk, as long as you can dip him in and out a tiny little bit, give him a rest in the midweek here, all of that there, especially when he's still building himself back up off the back of the last injury. I think that's what he needs. I think it's really difficult because I think you'd end up in this situation where there isn't another, like literally I thought against us, like if Akanji had been playing for us against City, we lose the game. And Akanji's City's fourth choice centre half. And if Akanji was playing for us, we lose the game. And yet with Joe Gomez, we don't. And I think this is the line here where, again, back to everything's got a but after it. But you've got to be able to look at this after it. And at the minute, I just think the manager and the team could just do with fewer buts, less clarity, fewer mitigating circumstances. This is what we're fucking doing. And that's what makes it hard.
I think Jurgen Klopp possibly, in terms of these signings, not even at centre half, but in terms of what we're after, needs to broaden things out a little bit in terms of what he needs and what you need to be a Liverpool footballer. Because I think there's a massive issue in the sense that the players who can come in and midfielders, and me and Kev Walsh like nearly murdered each other talking about this in the post Brighton show or whatever it was. But I made the point and he made the point that there's so many midfielders who can come in and improve us in terms of our better players and what we have. And I think that's true. But I think in terms of what Jurgen Klopp's asking, he's extremely picky in terms of what he's going for, and it's very narrow. I think he needs to expand that out, because what we've done in the end, and like I love Konate, and I think he's absolutely marvellous, and we're absolutely right to sign him, but injury proneness, if that's a word, which is not, injury proneness has become so far at the back, pushed to the back, they've almost ignored it in terms of what they're signing. It's like Ibrahim Konate is, you know, one of very, very few centre halves that we can sign and can play in the way that we want to play in terms of that high line, that we can't consider that he's injury prone, because if we start considering injury proneness of these players that we're signing, we'll literally not sign anyone. Artur Melo's the same. Now, I don't think for one second, you know, they've obviously looked at him and thought, well, he can do something in our midfield and he can play in the way we want. But again, look at his injury record. We're putting that to one side, and
I think I'm putting Artur to one side, full stop.
Well, yeah.
I think, you know.
But you get my general point in terms of, yeah.
But this is also another part of your general point, is that, for instance, you know, we have Milner at right back yesterday. We signed a right back in the summer. We've not seen hiding a hair of him, but it's not unreasonable given the fact that he's under 20.
Yeah.
So what is it that you want to do? And you're trying to go and, for instance, buy the next Andy Robertson from the source rather than go through the process if he goes to Hull. You might lose out on him at some point. All that. I think all that's fair. There's fairness to that. And there's an argument around that, and you can have that conversation, but you're having it in the context of all the other conversations as well. But I suspect part of those conversations is, and you know what, for 6 months Gomez can play right back, and then Gomez can't play right back because someone's got to play centre half, and I'm not interested, I don't think, in seeing Nat Phillips yesterday. Although in hindsight, you never know.
But does he back himself enough to, in terms of some players coming in who maybe aren't absolutely ideal for the system and for how we play, and in terms of their physicality and can they shift around, does he back himself enough? Because see, when he's backed into a corner and he's having to play players that he doesn't want to play. End of the COVID season, perfect example. He makes it work. So, can he broaden that out a little bit? Can he get these players in? Because for me, it's too picky, and we end up just signing injury-prone players because we have to, because there's literally nobody else available who's plays the way we want to play, physical enough, and isn't injury-prone. I just don't think those players exist, or certainly exist in within our budget at the moment.
Yeah, but again, the other part of that is at the minute City are playing, are not playing their first choice central defenders and the first choice shape by any stretch of the imagination, and that's, for instance, John Stones gets injuries. City's centre halves have got injuries for seasons. I think centre halves are tough. All right, we'll move on to the forwards very quickly. Philippa, I tell you what, the argument, whether it's Mo Salah's argument that he'd rather be out wide or Jurgen Klopp's argument he'd rather have Mo Salah out wide, whoever's argument that is, they were very much vindicated against Nottingham Forest. Getting Salah into the game looked downright impossible, although I thought he took a really bad knock. It looked like it really inhibited his movement.
It really did. And we can look at that, and obviously the commentators were very much dismissive of the fact that he even got a knock. But we've seen it time and time again. Salah does not stay down unless he's hurt, and he stayed down. I'm concerned that means that it stiffens up even more, and then he can't play against Ajax as well. But yeah, yesterday he was terrible. There's no way getting around it. He offered us literally nothing. And whether or not that's down to him or whether or not that's down to the service, because I felt like yesterday we didn't really have any creators in the side. Firmino, as I mentioned before, for me, hasn't been the creator that he was a couple of seasons ago. And I think we really miss something dynamic in the side at the moment. And basically we're relying on Salah to both create and to finish.
Well, can I ask
everything.
you, Philippa, you can literally pick those same players yesterday and you can play 4-3-3. So you can play Carvalho off the left, you can play Firmino through the middle as we've done, for God knows how long, and you can play Salah off the right. And then you can have Elliott pulling right in that right-hand side of the drill. Fabinho sits 6, Jones plays as the other 8, and then you've got the back 4 as was. And that, again, this is where, again, I've got sympathy, but simultaneously irritation, because this is the problem of choice. That now we're going, well, we can play more than one system, whereas gone back, we'd have gone, well, that's the way we play, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Now we can say, well, you could just have played 4-3-3.
Yeah, but I think that goes back to the thing earlier where I was saying, the fact that Thiago misses out, he brings Jones in and he doesn't want to change too much. So, Thiago misses out, and us looking at it in hindsight and going, yeah, well, you could have just changed the shape, played the same players, but played them in more natural positions, should we say. But at the end of the day, they've been training to basically play that way, and therefore they have that in the mind where we don't want to change too much going into this game because we're struggling as it is, and we need the players to kind of know what the jobs are on the pitch. And it's that... it's a no-win situation, isn't it? But
he's the one who says in his press conference himself, we'll play the right thing that troubles the opposition, that gets the best out of our players. He says that in his press conference, and that's why, again, I'm slightly playing devil's advocate with him, with the arguments I have with him in my own mind, as much as anything else. Is this therefore then it? Or, for instance, if you feel as though you get in at half time and you're not sure if this is working, can you go to 4-3-3? Can you decide that we want to use Salah out on the right, stretch the pitch that way for 15 minutes? It feels to me, and I think, listen, the goal came at the worst possible time, because Liverpool would have made changes on the hour regardless, and then it would have been a different proposition for Forest at 0-0. But this is where, at the minute, for the manager, he's ended up creating a situation for himself, which is the conversation with Andy and the conversation with Stu, and now it's with you, where there's all these moving parts all the time. And that's what I think is, and he's effectively having to manage a little bit more, if you sort of know what I mean, and make these decisions. And not making a decision is also making a decision, if you see what I mean. Yeah,
it is. And I think as much as anything, I think the coaching staff and Klopp are almost in their own heads as well. We're all in our own heads when we're watching it and we're going, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we do that? And it's very easy sitting there, watching it on a TV or watching it in the stand and going, why is he not doing this? And, yesterday with even the substitutions, people were criticising it and saying, what's he doing? We need a goal. And he's, taking off basically Firmino and bringing on Oxlade-Chamberlain, who's not played all season. But we don't know what's going on in the background. And how many substitutions has he made in recent weeks? And we've all criticised it because we said it's made us worse on the pitch, and then it comes out and that player's out for 2 or 3 weeks.
Or the flip side is some of them are being good and solid and successful. For me, Stu, though, watching the game, like watching it develop, one of the things I thought we were able to do, Milner does it on a couple of occasions, was actually get to their byline. This was not some sort of defensive masterclass from Forest. He congested the middle of the pitch, let Liverpool have it in wide areas. And I thought the ease with which at times we were getting to their byline, and not just by the byline, by the corner flag, getting to the byline in the penalty area, was making me think, well, man, maybe seeing the best player do that. Can we have the best one be in that area?
Or at least be involved in that area. For me, like you said there, maybe there's an argument to have him out wide, like we've seen earlier on the season yesterday. Well, yesterday we saw him play so central. He was constantly just looking to play on the shoulder. It looked like of Steve Cook, and I think that probably reverts back to was
he made somebody plays for Bournemouth.
Bournemouth, yeah. So there's the idea of we can take him for pace, but Nottingham Forest, we're not given any space in behind to play into. So you've got to look at that differently. But this is not a binary option here where he just plays down the middle or he plays, like I've said weeks ago, on the moon so far right. When he came on against Rangers and predominantly against City, he played in a way that he's mostly played for Liverpool, which is like an inside right position, where he's playing between the fullback and the centre half, and he's dragging people all over the place. And he might at times flit out to more wide areas or more central areas. But predominantly, he's trying to hurt teams in between that channel. And when you're saying yesterday, you've got Milner being able to get to the byline, you've got Elliott buzzing around there. It would have been lovely if
Trent Alexander-Arnold gets a header back post, which is a really good chance, actually. Yeah. And he has a bit of hard lines, Trent. He could almost just do with forcing it back across rather than trying to place it and be a little bit cute. But there's the space there. You can see the space there.
And I think what I didn't want us to see is get to the byline and then just start lashing in crosses, because I don't think we had the personnel to be able to get on the end of those crosses. As good as Firmino is in the air, he's going to get out-muscled. Carvalho's not going to be, flying in at the back post with a towering header. So I think what we needed to do when we get into those positions is little combinations and little pullbacks. And so if you had Salah perhaps in the space there, in his more typical Liverpool position over the years, I think he'd have been more of a threat. And when, by the way, if you are going to start him through the middle, and you can see it's patently obvious after 20 minutes that there's no space in behind. As you said, Neil, the personnel was there to make the change to go to a more orthodox 4-3-3 for us. So make the in-game change instead of just sticking at what you're doing when it's not working.
I think, in terms of Firmino and how he played, I slightly disagree with you guys. I think he's been very good this season, as well as scoring the goals. I realise I'm in the minority in that because I've seen Twitter and people are generally sort of on your side on that. I think he's been really good, but I think part of the reason for that, and I'm completely with you in your point about, and your point, Stu, as well, about getting Salah closer to the goal. Of course, he scores 40 goals a season. We want him closer to the goal, but half the reason Firmino's looks so good is because there's so much more space for him. We're used to playing. He's used to playing those tight areas with Salah and Mane bursting in. And all of a sudden, then the game's really congested around him. Our front four, so to speak, yesterday, whether you consider them midfielders or wide midfielders or forwards, our front four are all playing between the sticks. And therefore, it just gets so congested. And that's exactly what Nottingham Forest wanted. So actually, in a weird way, if Salah was to play with chalk in his boots yesterday, it might have actually helped us a little bit. It might, and it would give him Firmino more
all
space.
For 15 minutes.
It gives him something more to think about. It offers that ball from Van Dijk to Salah or Gomez to Salah, whoever it is. It gives him the more to think about. Yeah, exactly. For 15 minutes would have been absolutely fine. So yeah, there was so much about it. It was just so frustrating.
Okay. You can vote for us in the FSA Awards. It'll be tweeted out everywhere over our next week or so. Please do. If you want to take the opportunity. If I was pulling a slate together, it would obviously also include Conor McNamara and Jamie Carragher, but that's up to you. You don't have to vote in every category either. If you don't know, it's perfectly valid to say, I don't know, and move along from there. Also, we're now going to be in Ireland in Advent, the Advent Wrap. I'm really looking forward to the Christmas element of it. We normally don't get to do this sort of thing at that time of year. It only really occurred to me after we'd actually confirmed it. My God, we're going the first weekend of December. We will very much be having fun with that, so do come to those shows. Belfast on the Friday. Sorry?
Wait.
Oh, thank you. Belfast on the Friday, Dublin on the Saturday, and Cork on the Sunday. The three of them back-to-back there. First weekend of December. Really, really looking forward to that. Download the app and do all those little bits and pieces as well. No one's looking at the league table, so we'll scoot over that. We'll imagine very briefly aside for Ajax, and the problem with it is, Philippa, is you get the impression it will be the same conversation that's been had prior to the game against Nottingham Forest. which is it'll be about who's fit. We can presume, I think within reason, that Henderson starts. I think if Henderson starts and Thiago's fit, Thiago starts with him. If we're going to persevere with 4-2-4 or 4-4-2, you'd think that would be the midfield. Around there, I suspect Elliott probably keeps his place, much to Andy's chagrin. You'd think Nunez is available, as it was only a precaution from what the manager says. Salah starts, Firmino comes off, Firmino probably starts. I'm sort of doing it here, but do you expect any surprises?
I think Konate might come in. It's one of them, isn't it? I
think when he's fit, he'll come straight back in.
Yeah.
Was he benched yesterday? No.
No. But I honestly think, from what's being said anyway, it's not a long-term thing. And I think if it was a couple of days further on, Konate might have made it. I think what we've basically been talking about with Gomez, I think he's just got too many minutes in his legs in too short a space of time, and therefore it would make sense to take him out and maybe bring him on for the last half hour if whoever comes in isn't quite able to do the full 90. Trent obviously comes in. I don't know. I'd potentially play Milner in midfield and play 3 in there. I think at the moment it's too easy for teams to get through us, and I think against Ajax, a draw it gets us through, doesn't it? And that for me has to be our main priority. So while it's all well and good thinking how we can hurt teams, I think, on Wednesday it's more about stopping Ajax for me. So I want us to be as solid as possible.
We play a hybrid in the home game, and we're much the better side in the home game, Stu. It's worth pointing that out. The team in the home game is, obviously it's got Diaz and Jota in, who are now not available. It's Van Dijk and Matip, it's Thiago and Fabinho, Elliott off the flank, Elliott, Arnold and Salah down the right. Elliott is pulling very right in that shape. On that day it did feel like pretty close to it being a two-man midfield with Elliott floating around. I'm expecting something similar, to be honest with you. I'm expecting there being maybe a bit more of a move towards shutting it down as it wears on, but I'm expecting something similar.
If you'd ask me what I would do, I've said before, I don't like this shape, to be honest. So Philippa said there about going back to 4-3-3. I'd be cool with that. Except I'm just a little bit worried about the personnel, because I'm not convinced that Mo Salah plays after that knock. I think there's every chance. I mean, he had to have the freezy spray, didn't he, yesterday? So I think there's every chance that stiffens up and the manager takes a precaution. So if you are going to go with 2 up top with Firmino and Nunez, then I'd actually be really interested to see a 4-4-2 diamond. Trent comes in and Tsimikas maybe. I don't know. I'd like to see Robbo start, to be honest with you, but I'd actually quite like to see a 4-4-2 diamond, because I think it solves the problem of potentially of us being too easy to get through. I still think that we can hit Nunez and supply him from wide areas with Robbo and Trent, and I think away from home it's suitably cautious but also quite exciting as well, and might give us a platform to dominate. And in terms of going forward, if we are looking for an alternative to the 4-3-3, a diamond I think would suit this squad far more than, particularly where it is now with the current injuries that we've got in the forward areas. I think it would suit us more than the 4-4-2 or 4-2-4.
I'd go back to 4-3-3 for this one. A point's absolutely fine. I would actually would play Elliott. I'd play Fabinho, Henderson, and Elliott in that midfield. I'd go Nunez off the left, Salah on the right, Firmino through the middle. Okay,
interesting stuff across the board. Thank you very much to all three coming in on a Sunday morning after Liverpool throw that in. They know not what they do. It is fair to say, except for the fact that they do. Obviously, you could see what it meant to them and how downbeat they were post-match as well. Opportunity to put it right, obviously, very, very quickly against Ajax. The one thing I will point out in terms of all the team selections is it's the flip side of the Wednesday night to Saturday 12:30 is this is the biggest gap he can have between games. So if he is looking for freshness in some legs, he hasn't got the opportunity to get them any fresher than this, and then he gets Wednesday midweek going into Saturday midweek, and we go from there. And hopefully, if they get the result against Ajax that they need, then the game against Napoli becomes a form of a dead rubber, and he can make further changes around that one.
But we might need to win it by 4 goals to top the group, which would be really fun.
I mean, you can have that sort of chat if you want. I'm looking at the other groups, and I actually don't think it makes that much difference this year. I haven't had a little look. Maybe we might feel differently the other side, and also, there's no guarantees. There are lots of guarantees. There's no guarantees. There's lots of guarantees that Napoli will get a result against Rangers. Having seen both of those sides up close relatively recently, I would be amazed if the best team in Europe is stopped by one of the worst in the competition. Anyway, thank you very much to Stu, to Andy, and to Philippa, Ash for producing as well. It's been the Anfield Wrap this week. For God's sake, Liverpool.